Welcome to That Career Coach podcast. Today we are talking about your career and how it aligns with customer experience and what value you add for your clients. Today we have Rick Denton with us. He is an experienced professional both in the corporate world and self-employed. He owns the EX for CX business, which is all about tying your experience into that customer experience, building your business stronger. And he is also host of the CX Passport podcast. We're really excited to have you. Thanks, Rick, for joining us today.
Kendall, I am so excited to be on this show. This is going to be a blast. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, of course. It's awesome. And fun fact for listeners, Rick and I actually used to work together once upon a time in the corporate world. So it'll be kind of a reunion of sorts.
It is, but Kendall, it bothers me a bit to think about how long ago that was. I was thinking about that as we were getting into this recording and thinking, it's like, a couple years ago. We're talking like 7 years ago, 7 years.
Yeah, it's wild to think about. And so, obviously you've had a ton of success since leaving that company, moving on, finding your own kind of space where you could really flourish and do the things you're passionate about. So talk to me a little bit more about, how you got into customer experience, what makes you so passionate about it? How did you get what you're doing now and where you're going?
Yeah. So how did I get into customer experience? Boy, how long do we have for this show?
Right.
But how did I get into there? I got into it, I almost want to say slightly accidentally. It's a little bit of looking back over my career and realizing that I'd always been doing customer experience. It just, when I made the pivot into official customer experience, I was doing process work. I was doing operational excellence type work, process experience work, Lean Six Sigma type of things. And then realizing relatively quickly that, you know what? When we improve the process for the company, it makes it more efficient, it costs less and all that. It's actually better for the customer. And one of those light bulb epiphanies was when I was working for a financial services company, not the one that you and I worked at together. And we were working on reducing the appraisal length of time and how long did it take to do appraisals, which may sound familiar as well. And I realized that while we found a way internally to improve it, well, guess what? It also made it better for a customer. If you've ever bought a home and waiting for a mortgage, that appraisal can be one of those painful points in the experience. And that's when I realized, I actually kind of like doing that outside-in view and focusing on the customer. And I'd never get rid of that inside-out. That's that execution inside of the company name, Execution for Customer Experience. And it's just been a part of kind of who I've been. Perhaps the labels have changed. And I think you also asked about that passion. And that passion comes from, I'm going to be a little bit cheeky here, is because we're all customers, right? It's real easy to be passionate about something that affects every single human. I can't remember who it was, but I had a guest on CX Passport many episodes ago, and they were the ones that pointed out to me for the first time that being a customer is one of those few experiences that most every human, and I might argue every human, has the experience of being a customer. And so if you have the opportunity to improve customer experience, then you actually have the opportunity to improve the lives of everyone. And then I'll also say, I'll be a little selfish here. If I'm improving customer experiences, then it's better for me too. You've been PG. Let's keep it PG. You've been ticked off at brands. And you have not had a great experience with brands. We all have. And so as a customer, the more that I can help companies get better, well, then guess what? It's better for me, the customer, as well.
Yeah, and that is so incredibly true because we're all ideally working for that end customer, working for that end client, right? Without them, the business does not exist. The job does not exist that you find yourself in. And so it's smart to be focused on that both at the company level, but also as like the individual contributor level. How do you add impact to your end customer? You've worked both internally and externally as a consultant in the customer experience space. What do you think is the biggest impact from improving the customer experience outside of that selfish win of I get to interact with better customers as that client? What does that big impact look like?
It framed in the way you asked that, actually, something you said kind of at the beginning of that, Kendall, is it hit my head, and that is, as customers, we know that there's a better, and businesses, we know that it's better if we do things better for the customer. I think I'd actually stop down on that for a second, and that's part of what has somewhat disappointed me with businesses, is that not all of them recognize that. Not all of them seem to have that same passion for the customer experience that I would hope that they do. There is still that ongoing, I just was in a conversation with somebody this morning about it, that ongoing discussion around what is the ROI of customer experience? What am I getting out of that? And there's two schools of thought there. One is the ROI of, okay, look, there is a very clear path if you work at it to by improving a customer's experience, they are going to spend more with you. They're going to be more loyal. They're going to tell their friends and family about it. And that is going to result in greater dollars for your business. Or if you improve customer experience, like in my appraisal example, you get more efficient. You do things quicker as a company. Well, that then can help reduce your costs. So that is better for the company as well, while also being better for the customer. There's a clear line between improving customer experience and then achieving business results. And that's what I help companies do. The other school of thought, though, is why are we even having this conversation? No one asks about the ROI of HR. No one asks about the ROI of the marketing department or the finance department. They're just part of what is required when it comes to doing business. And so I understand that I can never get fully away from that ROI from it, that impact of it. But there really is that impact of it. While on the side, I'm still saying, yeah, but why do we keep getting asked that question? But I promise you, there will be business results with improved customer experience.
No, and it's so true, because I was actually talking to a client about a business that they own, and we were talking about, we'll call it the pending recession that we may be facing, right? I mean, if you've been watching financial services the last few weeks, it's a little more dicey than it was.
Yes.
And one of the things we talked about in recession-proofing your business is building that good customer experience, not just for the customer who's going through the process, but bringing them back, right? And repeat business should be a huge portion of most business portfolios. And if you can't deliver a great experience, you can't bring them back, because who would want to work with you if they have a horrible one?
Absolutely. And I'm going to give full credit to someone, Katie Stabler. Folks will have to go look her up on LinkedIn. She was well, guess what? She was a guest on CX Passport. That's why I know her, right? Actually, kind of a brilliant story. She was a guest on MasterChef UK at one point. So there's an interesting story there. But she talked about exactly what you're talking about earlier at the beginning of this year, when whether it's capital R recession or lowercase r recession, downturn, whatever, it doesn't even really matter. But she was pointing out that customers still need to engage with brands, but they're going to limit their engagement with brands. They're going to make choices between brand A and brand B, the experience X or experience Y. And it is the experience that they have with the brand that's going to help them choose between A or B. If they have a limited and even a shrinking piece of their wallet, then their experience is going to help define that. And so wouldn't you want to, if you're a customer going through a stressful time of a recession, depression, decline, a reduction in income, whatever that looks like, inflationary period, wouldn't you want to be with a brand that honored you as a customer and gave you a great experience? Well, then you're going to be more loyal to them. Not just, we talk about coming out of it, but even in the midst of it, during it. And so companies that are right now, that are this moment focusing on customer experience, are the ones that we're going to be talking about on the back end of this as being amazing businesses, amazing growth stories, because they focused on the customer experience when it might not have been trendy, it might not have been cool to do, it might have been risky to do so. But those are the companies, those are the brands that are going to win, because the customer is still going to, this is going to sound really silly, but the customer is still going to be a customer whether it's a recession or not. And so deliver a great experience and they'll stick around.
Yeah. And there's so many parallels to that in how you enact your career, right? A lot of my listeners are driving for career progression, driving for career growth. And if in your career you can make an impact on your end client experience, on that end business delivery, that progresses your career forward, right? And also, to your point, there is an ROI there, right? So a lot of the things I talk about with my followers, how do you articulate the impact of your work? And client experience has like that direct articulation of, I made the customer more satisfied. That makes them more likely to come back. It drives up our revenue. It improves our processes. We're more efficient. Like, there's that bundling up that kind of aligns. And to the second point of what you were saying of a customer will be a customer anyways, the example that I've been thinking about a lot lately, and I'd love to get your perspective, is Southwest Airlines.
Okay, let's keep going.
So Southwest Airlines, if I think back 5 years ago, right, they were like the friendly way to fly, right? They had like the funny spiel when you boarded the plane, no assigned seats, first come, first serve, great customer experience if you ever had an issue. And the last 6 months have not been kind to them,
Correct.
right? Their whole system tanks in December and they cancel 10,000 flights and have to refund millions upon millions of dollars to customers. Then they're having issues keeping staffing. So now you have to wait twice as long to check bags with them. Their check bag system went down a few weeks ago. Like they're one of those companies that, like, when I think of great customer experience. But as a customer whose flight was canceled coming back on Christmas Eve, whose bags were lost and disappeared for 2 months, who couldn't check their bags to go on a flight 5 weeks ago because they only had one person working on spring break. Like,
Yeah.
they're an interesting example of, like, are they doing right by the customer? And it's amazing how quick that perception can change from, like, even if it's been 10 years of great customer experience.
Boy,
So
that's
how
a
do you balance
really
that?
that's a really important point. And let me start by saying, and you are talking to me in the North Texas area, so I've got two hometown airlines to choose from, and I'm a Southwest loyalist for my domestic business. Made a change a few years ago because some disappointing experiences the other way around. So I have an inherent bias to talk about Southwest, and I guess full disclosure, right? I'm actually married to a former Southwest flight attendant, so there's a little bit of family ties there as well. She was flying in an era that you were describing of that the fun, the really customer focused. And here's what I'd say about that is that I think the jury is still out on what's going to happen here. They had a massive, we won't even go into detail, right? The massive operational failures that you're describing. It definitely impacted their reputation. But here's something that I would point out and why customer experience can be so incredibly valuable to a business. There is a lot of brand and customer loyalty, a lot of brand and customer equity that has been built up over that period of time that, yes, they have lost a segment of the customer forever. But there's still a segment of the customer that says, you screwed me over. I don't like what you did to me, but I'm still loyal to you. Now, you've drawn out of your equity account. The balance is low here, but I'm still with you and I'm still loyal with you because of that. And I say that on the macro level, but I'm going to speak to it on the individual level. We too had a negative Southwest experience coming out of the spring break. And a flight was canceled due to weather. See the air quotes. If it's an audio podcast, I did the cheesy air quotes there. We'll just leave it at that, right? And the way that they took care of us in this experience was very poor. They did not have options for us. We had to drive 4 hours to get to another airport, yada, yada. Everybody's got their travel story. And the letter that I intend to write to them, whether it's real or just imagined in my head, starts with, look, I'm a Southwest loyalist. I want you to succeed, but here's how you disappointed me. And if you looked at my future bookings for the rest of the year, I still have another probably 15 flights booked with Southwest coming up in the year. I didn't cancel all those. They screwed me over. I'm not happy with them, but they earned my they earned my trust that they will get through this operational piece of it. And if they don't, well, then, yeah, of course I'm going to fire them. But they get that second chance. And I don't. We could go down a completely next rabbit hole. And while it's the customer experience they were great at, we talked about the business process stuff at the beginning. Well, that is a fundamental piece of getting customer experience right. And I think a lot of companies have lost that, forgotten about it. There's a lot of energy around, can we just be friendly? Can we do the best digital chatbots and those kind of things? You know what? Sometimes the nuts and bolts, the basics of blocking and tackling, getting those channel another guest, getting those first downs rather than the touchdown passes of customer experience right are the things that will actually advance a company's forward. And I get the sense that, I know this will probably release in the middle of 2023, but I kind of feel like 2023 is going to be the year where process raises its head in customer experience, and companies that get process right are the ones that are going to actually get the basics of customer experience right.
Yeah. And what you said about, hey, they've built up my loyalty, they've built up my equity. I think the same thing is true of your career.
Yes.
Right? If you've been a rock star and you've been crushing it and delivering and executing, and you make a mistake, you hope your boss isn't going to turn around and be like, you're fired, right?
Right.
I mean, unless you work for who made your fired famous, odds are you're probably not going to lose your job over one small mistake. But your boss may say, like, hey, your equity, this took a hit, right? In order to allow for that and to allow for that safe room for failure, right? And so as you think of building equity in your career with great wins, it's the same way the company's building that loyalty equity, right? And there may be mistakes on both sides, but unless the first project you ever do for your boss is a horrible failure, odds are you've got a little bit of equity to carry you through. And it's important to kind of build that up and find that balance that allows you to take risks. Now, I don't think Southwest was intentional necessarily, but you know, even spring break, I didn't cancel my spring break flights after my flight was canceled in Christmas.
Right.
And you know, I went back. So it does definitely like build up that equity, that loyalty, which I think is important.
And that example of using the career as the example is such a key one. In fact, I was chuckling a little bit when you said, you know, unless your first project was a failure. You know what? Actually, I'd hope that if a company invested enough to choose to hire you, that actually they would work you through that first one, right? Fail first, learn from it, and then pivot from there. Obviously, if you have a serial pattern of failure, well, then no, you are in the wrong match, and that's not your career. And it is very similar to the customer experience, the career experience. And we also have a whole nother conversational thread that's available of how employee experience influence customer experience. But when I'm thinking about, you know, my own career development, it's those times that I have been focused on the customer that has really helped kind of advance things forward. You were alluding to that a little bit earlier. And even in those cases where you're describing a situation, let's say that you were doing some work and it went the wrong way, I would submit, and of course the specifics are what matter, but if you were doing it while focused on the customer and trying to deliver for the customer and you had the objectives for the customer, you've certainly got an argument to be made of, okay, well, here's what we learned about that and we can do that differently and still advance your career even as you're perhaps learning things that went awry.
Yeah.
But that focus on the customer certainly can help advance not just the overall business. And what is a business? A business is just a collection of individuals. So if those individuals are focusing on the customer, then the overall company continues to grow.
Yeah, and it's funny. So keeping with our airline theme that has spontaneously become
how did this happen
for this podcast? One of my favorite operational process improvement analysis that I've learned of in my career was, and I can't even remember which airport it was, but an airport did analysis. They did a bunch of customer research, and people complained that they had to, like that where they received their bags was too far from where the planes were docking, right? They had to walk all the way across the airport to get to where the bags were, and it took too long. So the airport does this huge overhaul, and they move all of the baggage check closer to the gates, right? They completely rework the layout of the airport. They move everything only for the customers' complaints to become, I have to wait too long for my bags.
Yep.
Because the time they were spending walking to the bags, they felt like the bags appeared magically, and it was perfect amount of time. But now that the bags were closer, well, now I have to wait for my bags, right? The time to delivery of the bag did not change, just the amount of effort on behalf of the individual. And so there is a lot of feelings mixed into it, right? There's a lot of that potential for failure, even with the customer in mind. So how do you kind of balance that data side that, hey, this is going to make our customer experience go up, it's going to make people more satisfied, against the feeling of like, well, yeah, now I feel like it's closer, but I also feel like I have to wait, right? There was no way to anticipate that. So how do you kind of balance that in your line of work?
You know, the reason why I'm smiling and chuckling is because one of the things that makes customer experience work so satisfying and so maddening is that it's with customers, and customers are humans. At least so far, customers are humans. Y'all check out James Dodkins and some of his conversation around how customers are now becoming bots, and bots are talking to bots and doing transactions that way. But at least for now, the majority of us as customers are humans, and we're messy, and we are kind of a pain in the butt. And And that makes this incredibly satisfying when we get it right, but incredibly maddening when we get it wrong, especially when a company in your scenario, they listened to the customer. And they did exactly what they thought the customer wanted, and then the customer said, no, that's not what I wanted. And so you've described a lot of what is the art of customer experience, right? It is actually exactly as you described. There's the data element. The data said specifically the customer's primary complaint is the distance that they have to walk. But that's where gut feel really comes in, and the art and the humanity and the feeling side of it really come into play. And I want to, at the end of this, make sure that we talk about also how this helps kind of the career part of it. I want to get back to that. But when we think of just the customer experience part of it, that's where that gut feel. Or something that I would submit is that's also where companies really thrive when they do, this is cliche, but when they live in their customer's shoes. Mm-hmm. So instead of redesigning your entire airport, why not have like a little faux pilot kind of thing and go out there and first just do what the customer is doing. All right, yeah, that is a really long walk. That stinks, but the bags are there. Well, let me do a short walk. Oh, wait, my bags aren't here. They would have discovered that if they'd actually experienced it and did it, physically did it. Yeah. And that's some of the art there's the storytelling part of it that really, and the emotional part of it that in this example doesn't necessarily come into play here, but so much of customer experience is actually getting that customer's voice, not just the data that they provide, but what they're telling you, how they're telling you. That's why some of the great tools that are out there right now have incorporated video feedback in there. So a customer, as they finish an experience, can just record their videos. They're walking out of whatever that experience is, and these tools can discern and think about it. Just like this today. If I were typing this essay in conversation with you, Kendall, it would be a lot more sterile than this video conversation that we're having together back and forth. And so the emotion of customer can really help drive the customer experience projects and the like forward. And it's that emotion that I want to tie to career for just a second. I hope that you'll indulge me on this one. And that is, when we talk about career advancement, we want to think that it's very much a meritocracy and it's very checkbox, do X, you, I keep going back to my formula. So basically, if you do something, you receive the results of that. But there's a lot of emotion and a lot of career progression that goes beyond facts. And there is, if I'm trying to advance a customer experience initiative or I'm trying to advance my career, there's nothing quite like a customer story. So if I'm an agent who has been a contact center agent that has been collecting a series of stories of great tales from the customer, doesn't that play have a lot more emotional impact when you hear how a customer was saved from a particularly bad experience by this agent? Yeah. And that agent is playing that call or is able to provide that information to their team more so than just, okay, well, my call handling time was this and my resolution time was that. In a tie, that emotion is going to push that forward. So that focus on the customer and that ability to get that emotional side of customer experience moving forward can not only help your customer experience initiatives advance, which would help your business results advance, it helps your career advance as well as you're focused on that emotional side of customer.
Yeah, and it's interesting. One of the things I talk about often with clients and on my page is, the game, the corporate game, right? It's a whole set of rules. Nobody teaches you. You learn trial by fire, ideally not in your first job, and you get like a little bit of a breather, but at some point you go through it. And one of the things that I often will share with people is the projects that got me the most notice and recognition at work were almost never things related to my core job. Uh-huh. It was almost never that I produced enough widgets or that my widgets were accurate. The things that earned recognition and growth and progression in my career were things like leading employee engagement, which I'm very passionate about, right? How do we keep our employees present and satisfied? Customer experience. How do we deliver great solutions for the customer so that they are driving increased revenue, increased profit? The projects that earned the most recognition and the most progression are very rarely, did you check all of the boxes of your job? Mm-hmm. And so to your point of bringing in that emotion, how do you sell that? How do you package that? How do you communicate to your leadership, hey, this is not only the great work that I did from a widget perspective, but here's the impact. And here's why it was important. Here's why I'm passionate about it and why I'm here today. And that really changes the way that the story flows rather than like, yes, we produced all 10 widgets this month.
And what a wonderful set of reports. And look, I've even got it in a clear plastic binder, and it is it's squared perfectly on your desk, teacher. Absolutely, Kendall. And one of the safest, I don't know if I'll go ahead and say it, right? But one of the safest way to choose that go above and beyond is exactly what you said, employee experience or customer experience, because those invariably will create business results, either in the more engaged employee or the business results. So if you're looking for something to improve, look for something that's broken. And I think of an initiative that we, not you, me, we, but our teams worked together collectively on at that employer that we were together, where it was for the benefit of the agents. It simplified life for the agents phenomenally. And it delivered phenomenal results for the customer, because when the customer called in and had a question, the agent didn't have to go through 15 screens to achieve that. Well, that was above and beyond what was probably the official designated requirements for you and your team. But by choosing something that was such a delight for the customer and was such a delight for the employee, what a victory that was. And that victory was recognized not just within our localized team, within our localized department division, but beyond, because of the impact that it was to the employee and to the customer.
And it's often those listening for problems, right? I had a client that I work with, think really highly of, senior leader. And he once told me, he said, I have this guy I work with. He's just brilliant. He's so smart. Everything he does is just spot on. I said, really? Is any of it his job? He goes, well, no. I said, okay, so how did he think of those great things? He goes, well, we complained about him a lot. And I go, great. So are you listening when the people around you are complaining? He's like, oh, I could fix those problems. And I'm like, yes, there we are. Perfect. Great. Like, we have achieved. But it is, it's so easy to go into your job and think negative thoughts. It's the same way as a client and a customer. Most often your reviews are your negative ones. Very rarely does somebody write in and say, I just want to say Rick was so kind and my process was so great and everything was so perfect. Like, customers don't take that time.
I get those, but I understand the point you're making.
But employees work the same way. We love to complain about the things that are wrong.
Yeah.
But very rarely do people go, well, I could fix that, and then go fix it. And so whether it's the customer bringing the feedback or the employee bringing the feedback, it's that lean in, that,
yes,
hey, I heard of a problem. I have an idea for a solution. I might as well try it. And to your point, try it quickly, fail it quickly if it's going to fail, and then roll out those kinds of solutions. That's what sets you apart, right? Both as a company for your customers, but as an employee for your company.
You said what is at the epicenter of what the core of the consulting that I do, and that is this idea of voice the customer, and specifically total voice the customer. And in a pithy way, it's stop, survey, and score, start, listen, and act. And that's what I tell companies to do. Is it doesn't matter if you've got your great survey and your score went up, yay, or your score went down, boo, but rather, what did you do with the information? And to that, that is such a vital portion of getting customer experience right and creating tangible business results. That's what we're in business for, right? We want our businesses to deliver great experience, but let's be honest. As long as you're a for-profit business, you're there for profit. Mm-hmm. And so there's results. But that is so true in that employee experience, or really just kind of the career experience that you're describing there, of that listen and act. Your client there, it sounds like they were listening, they heard, or maybe they were hearing, mm-hmm. but they weren't acting on it. And so that listen and act applies in our customer experience space, in our employee experience space, in our career experience space.
Yeah. It's so true. And I'm so interested to hear. So you and I worked together years ago, financial services company. We did a bunch of great work together. Your team got a lot of accolades for all the strong things that they delivered. I'd like to think we were surrounded by some pretty smart people too, who kind of empowered us to do our own thing.
Yeah.
But you chose to leave, right? You made the decision that the corporate world was not the right fit for you. And so while I am a coach who supports people in their corporate journeys, sometimes the best solution is this isn't the right fit for you.
Right.
So how did you make that decision? What was it that led you to want to start your own business, really?
So first, let me stop down and talk about, oh my gosh, the team that surrounded me was amazing. Absolutely. The people that were around me allowed me to just get out of the way. They were the pod was brilliant. So all kudos to them for what we were able to achieve. And that actually is what drove me to that point of, we achieved what we had set out to achieve. We'd improved customer experience. We were seeing improved business results as a result of those business results, right? And so I looked around to try to find the right next challenge, and it wasn't there. And that's okay. And I think one of the things that I had learned in my career is that nothing's permanent. Even experiencing when I worked at JCPenney and a certain person came into the company and killed the company, that ended my time there, right? And I was able to pivot because I'd gone through career changes before that. But people who had been at that company for 20, 30 years were just deer in headlights, lost. And so I think to start the answer to your question, or maybe get in the middle of it, is the first thing is just being willing to recognize that the right next challenge may not be where you are. And that's okay. That's not quitting. That's not abandoning. It's just realizing it's not the right next match. And so that sent me out on my own. And I didn't walk out the door going, I'm starting a company. But it was sort of okay, I'm going to see and explore and what's out there. And I set up a shingle. I came up with a brand and put a company out there just in case I got some quickie contract jobs while I looked for the next one. Well, lo and behold, I got that first consulting engagement. And I really kind of enjoyed that. And it had a finite period of time. Here's what we need to do. Here's what we need to deliver. And then we're done. And then I found the next one. And it was by the third one I realized, I think I actually like this, and I like the variability of this. So for those that would be exploring, do I want to leave the corporate world? A lot of it has to come down to things like, okay, are you comfortable with that variability? Are you comfortable with that quick shift? Are you comfortable with that quick turnover? And one of the things that I get asked all the time is, well, aren't you worried? Don't you feel less secure? And my answer is, I actually feel more secure as an independent consultant than I ever did as a W-2 employee. And that was my journey. That was my experience. But because of things like I described, that somebody coming in and killing a company, or the fact that I worked for .coms in the late 90s, early aughts, where just the company ran out of money, not me. The security that comes from being an independent and knowing that at least I have some degree of control over the clients that I seek and the clients that I get the opportunity to work with and, well, let's call it out, choose to work with as well, is a particularly freeing one. And so that's how I got to there. There's so much more. We could do like a series on independent consulting, but hopefully that gives you a little sense of how I got to that point and some of the things that you just have to mentally get past or choose to get past. And if you don't want to, great. The corporate world is wonderful. It's a great place to be. I'm not anti-corporate world. It just wasn't my scene.
Yeah, and there's so many things that you touched on that I want to double down on. And it's interesting because I feel, obviously I do consulting on the side and I am passionate about my clients and my career coaching. And a lot of those skills came from corporate, right? I built up a lot of that skill set in the corporate world. I'm sure you did too, and how to do operational excellence, how to listen to the voice of the customer. Right. And then you, for lack of a better term, took your show on the road and here you are, right? Implementing all of those skills. And so I think there's value to both, right? And it's more about finding the right fit for you, your stage of life, what you're looking for, and finding that balance. And the second thing I want to touch on is, Rick, did we overlap at JCPenney? I'm wondering, because I was brought on right as he who shall not be named established his C-suite. And so now I'm curious if there was like a brief period of overlap.
I think we overlapped.
I worked there.
My time ended in 2012.
Yes, then we did overlap for like 2 years, basically. So that is so fascinating to me.
So you experienced a very similar thing there, yes.
Did,
but we did overlap.
I worked for the CFO at that time.
Okay.
Running his basically internal consulting mini group, and definitely a trial by fire, right? Great opportunity.
We were definitely in different worlds. I was in the international buying office world at that time. So while I was on planes and factories in Asia, you were getting the deep, dark secrets of what was going to tank the, well, I guess not technically tank, but certainly severely impair the company.
Well, one of my favorite things thinking back on this, and just a quick caveat for listeners, do not recommend this that I'm about to say. All right. This is one of those like do as I say, not as I do.
Ooh, I can't wait for this one. Okay.
So when I was interviewing, I was fresh out of school, was interviewing with JCPenney, and I had a meeting with the CFO at that time. He came into my interview. We had like a luncheon, and he goes, he asks the room, because there's like multiple interviewees, what do you guys think of our business strategy? And everyone's like, oh, I think it's great. It's brilliant. We're so excited that so-and-so is here and we're going to do great things. And he got to me and I was like, I do not feel like you understand your core customer. And I think you're going to lose a lot of sales, but I think I could learn a lot. And he hired me on the spot. Like I never even left the room. He was like, wow, you work for me now and we're going to figure this out. And it was such an interesting experience because once again, do not recommend telling C-suite that their idea is a terrible idea. And if you're going to tell them, certainly don't tell them that bluntly. But
Kendall, you're on to something though. I don't want to derail it too much, but you're actually, that contrarian view of career development is so true. I have found that to be the case, not only as an employee, but as a consultant, that when you're willing to, oh gosh, this is such a cheesy phrase. I just don't want to say it, but speak truth to power, that when you do that, there's actual credibility that is to be gained. And you're right. Rojo fired the customer. Rojo fired the customer, and therefore the company failed. You saw it, and were willing to tell that CFO's probably heard nothing but yes all of their life. So I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I couldn't resist. There's actually, there is a little bit of actually do as you say.
And I think
it's risky.
One of the things that we talk about a lot when I'm dealing with clients who are in a situation where maybe they don't agree with their senior leadership is there's absolutely nothing wrong with making your opinion known. The issue comes in after you shared your opinion, if they still don't agree, the ability to drop it.
Yes.
Because what leaders don't want is somebody who then argues every single conversation of every single day about why they think something is wrong. At that point, you're not helping. And so it's important to be authentic, be yourself, show up and say, hey, I disagree fundamentally with this decision. Here's why. I don't think you understand your end customer. I don't think the brand shift is going to take place in the market the way that you think it is. And I think you're spending too much money with no money left. And they say, great, we're going to keep doing it. And you go, great, I'm happy to help with that. How would you like me to step in?
Right.
Because that is your job. And so that authenticity buys you back to that, I forget how you phrased it, of like building up that equity, right? It buys you that equity of like, oh, I trust her. She's willing to share her opinion.
Right.
But even more so, the ability to execute, regardless of your opinion, buys even more equity to say, okay, she let us know. We disagreed. She got it done anyways.
Yeah.
And that was a very hard learned lesson at the company you and I worked together, is I felt like I had to fight, like, this is the right thing. And at some point, somebody's like, you have just got to stop. Like, you may be right, but nobody cares at this point. So just set it aside, get the work done. And I was like, that is very...
And there's degrees there, right? When it comes to a career, I have examples of that in my career where, yes, okay, I said, look, I don't agree, but this is not the hill I'm dying on. So then great, I'll keep, and I'm going to execute, and we'll march forward. You're the leader, march forward. There's also a values component to it as well. And if it crosses your values, and there's a spectrum of values, right? You know, and what that looks like. Well, then you have to make that decision of, is this the right place for me? Is this the right team for me? And that gets back to what I was saying earlier. It's not necessarily a bad thing if you find yourself that separation is the better option. That's okay. At least, you know, for me, it's okay, especially if it crosses some values. And there was a company that I worked for. I was like, not the one that you and I have not shared, I don't think, the career experience at this place. And I realized very quickly this was not my values, and it was time for me to go.
And so it is a lot of finding the right skill match to the right company.
Yes.
Right? And that's something that I think a lot of people overlook. And you think, well, if I'm a good employee, I'm a good employee everywhere. I would debate different.
Yeah.
If you're a great employee, you're a great employee most places.
Yes.
And you're probably not a good fit at some places. And if you're a bad employee, you could still be a great fit at some places, right? There's finding the right match between your skills and what the company values, and where you're comfortable executing on it. So I think it's so interesting, you know, all of the ways that you and I's careers have kind of weaved and interacted, even though we do such fundamentally different types of jobs. We always end up kind of in the same spot of like, but it comes down to operational excellence, the customer, and sharing your value and your impact. Like, that is ultimately what has led us in the directions that it has. And so it's been so awesome having you come in, talk on the podcast, share all of this unique perspective with us. You know, do you have any last minute thoughts to share with listeners, or ways that they can get in touch with you if they want to learn more about the customer experience side of the world?
Yeah. So here's a last thought. Boy, that took me a lot of words to get into there. Sorry, 7 thoughts hit my mouth at the same time. Let me distill them into one. And the first, let me answer the latter part of that, and that is, former latter, I don't know. But what would I leave with your listeners? And that is, it's related to what you just said. And that was, our experiences, our jobs, our roles are vastly different. And yet we do find ourselves intersecting. And some of that's just the small world nature of life. I would say to your listeners that realize no matter what role you're in, the customer should be your focus. And think of what your role is doing for the customer. Even if you are, no, I won't even go into examples, but your role that feels several layers removed from the front line engagement with the customer, you are still impacting the customer. And so if you think of how to do your role, your job, what your responsibilities are with the customer in mind, you will advance not only the business objectives and the business results forward, you will advance your career forward. And I think that's something I really would want to leave with your listeners. If anybody wants to get in touch with me to talk more about that, I'd give them sort of a couple of ways. One is certainly have a listen to the podcast. That'll give you a little perspective of who I am and the guests that come on. And so you can find that on the web at cxpassport.com, or you can find it on YouTube. It's recently switched over to video, so it's at youtube.com/@cxpassport. And if anybody wants to explore a little bit more about my philosophy around voice of the customer and how I go about business, it's totalvoc.com. all of those hang off the EX4CX website, but the totalvoc.com is how you can get to learn a little bit more about my philosophy. And then, of course, LinkedIn, right? That is where we do our business social networking, and by all means, hit me up there. Would love to connect and have a conversation with you there.
Yeah. Well, we so appreciate you, Rick, coming in, sharing so much wisdom about the customer, about your career and your career pathing and how you decided to become a consultant. It's been great. We'll definitely have to have you back, but appreciate you carving out some time for us today.
Kendall, it was brilliant. Loved having the opportunity to be on your show today. Thanks so much.